Oh my God, is that me? Why is my picture on this wall? This can't be real.
One desperate evening, a homeless girl walked through the gates of a billionaire's mansion, grateful just to have a job as a maid. But the moment she stepped into his private study to clean, her heart stopped. Hanging on the mahogany wall, framed in gold, was a portrait of her as a little child. How is that even possible? What is her childhood photo doing in a stranger's home? And what happens next will leave you speechless and wondering about the mysteries buried in forgotten memories. Before we dive in, please like, share, and subscribe for more emotional stories of love, loss, and family reunions. The winter had barely begun to settle over the city, yet the shelter beds already felt harder than usual, hard enough to remind Lucy that she did not belong anywhere. At just 21, she had learned more about survival than most people twice her age. Life had pushed her hard, harder than she ever imagined. And now she stood alone outside St. Michael's homeless shelter, clutching a worn employment letter as a cold wind cut through her threadbare coat. Her stomach ached again, dull and constant. It had been 3 years since she'd had a real home, since her mother Kate had died in a charity hospital bed, gripping Lucy's hand and whispering words that made no sense. "I did what I thought was right. We had to leave. It wasn't safe. Forgive me, sunshine." Grief was no longer just a feeling. It was a hollow space inside her chest, a weight pressing down on her shoulders, a loneliness that made even crowded shelter rooms feel empty. Lucy leaned against the brick wall and closed her eyes for a moment. Her body ached from sleeping on cots. Her hands were rough from whatever odd job she could find. And her hope was cracked from 3 years of doors closing in her face. Yet she refused to give up. Life had taught her that tears never brought answers. She took a deep breath and whispered to the gray sky, "Mom, please let this job work out. I can't do this much longer." People passed by on the sidewalk, business professionals heading to offices, students rushing to classes, mothers walking children home from school. Some glanced at her with pity, others with discomfort. But none stopped. After 3 years on the streets and in shelters, Lucy had become invisible. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind, the only memory she clung to whenever the world felt unbearable. "My sunshine. No matter how hard life gets, never lose hope. Sunshine." That was what her mother used to call her. But with Kate gone for 3 years now, Lucy felt like a dying ember. She hugged the employment letter tighter, trying to hold on to whatever hope she had left. The morning air carried the smell of fresh coffee and warm pastries from a nearby cafe, and the scent hit her empty stomach like a painful reminder of everything she didn't have. She tried to distract herself, checking the address on the letter again, but her hands trembled. An older woman sweeping the sidewalk in front of her shop noticed Lucy's distress and walked closer. "You all right there, honey?" The woman called out gently. "You look lost." Lucy shook her head quickly. "No, ma'am. I have a job interview. I'm just trying to make sure I have the right address." The woman studied her carefully. The hollow cheeks, the too thin wrists, the clothes that hung loosely on her frame despite being her only decent outfit. "You look like you haven't eaten in a while," the woman said softly. Lucy opened her mouth to deny it, but tears betrayed her. She nodded slowly, voice barely a whisper. "I'm okay. I really need this job to work out." The woman sighed deeply, pulled a wrapped breakfast sandwich from her bag, and pressed it into Lucy's hands. "Here, take this. You can't go to an interview looking half-starved. Where's this job at?" Lucy's voice shook as she read the address. Reynolds Estate, 1247, Hillcrest Drive. The woman's eyebrows rose. "Stephen Reynolds? The billionaire? That's the biggest mansion in the whole city. You got a job there." "As a maid," Lucy said, both embarrassed and desperate. It's through an employment agency. They said Mr. Reynolds needs someone immediately. The woman nodded thoughtfully. Well, you eat that sandwich and get yourself together. That kind of opportunity doesn't come twice. Rich folks like that, they might seem far away from people like us, but sometimes destiny works in mysterious ways. Lucy unwrapped the sandwich with shaking hands, taking small bites to keep from crying. The kindness felt overwhelming after so much coldness. "Thank you," she whispered. "God bless you." The woman touched her shoulder gently. "You go get that job, honey. And don't let anyone make you feel small just because you're starting at the bottom. Everybody's got a story. Everybody's got a journey." Lucy finished the sandwich, straightened her coat as best she could, and checked her reflection in a shop window. She looked tired, thin, desperate, but she couldn't afford to fail. This job was her last chance. The shelter had a 3-month limit, and her time was almost up. It was either the Reynolds estate or back to the streets. She pulled out the crumpled city bus schedule and began the long journey toward Hillcrest Drive, toward the mansion on the hill, toward a destiny she couldn't possibly imagine. As the bus climbed higher into the wealthy neighborhood, Lucy pressed her face to the window, watching the houses grow larger, the gates more ornate, the gardens more perfect. This was a world she'd only seen from a distance, a world where people didn't worry about shelter beds or where their next meal would come from. When the bus finally stopped at Hillcrest Drive, Lucy stepped off with trembling legs. The Reynolds estate loomed before her. Massive iron gates, manicured lawns, a mansion that looked like something from a movie. For a moment, she almost turned around. She didn't belong here. She was nobody. Just another homeless girl desperate for work. But her mother's voice whispered again, "Never lose hope, sunshine." Lucy straightened her shoulders, walked to the gate's intercom, and pressed the button. A crisp voice answered, "Reynolds Estate. State your business." I'm Lucy Morrison. I have an appointment with Mrs. Chen about the maid position." A pause. Then, "Come to the service entrance. Someone will meet you." The gate buzzed open, and Lucy stepped through. Into a world that felt impossible, into a mansion that stirred something she couldn't name, into a destiny that had been waiting 14 years for her to finally come home. She didn't know it yet. She couldn't possibly know. But the moment she crossed that threshold, everything she thought she knew about her life, her mother's secrets, and her own forgotten past was about to shatter completely. 3 years. That's how long Lucy had been surviving rather than living. 3 years since she'd held her mother's hand in that charity hospital room, watching the light fade from Kate's eyes as machines beeped their final warnings. 3 years since her mother's last words, whispered, urgent, apologetic, had left Lucy with more questions than answers. "I did what I thought was right. We had to leave. It wasn't safe. Forgive me, sunshine." Lucy carried those words like stones in her pockets, heavy and sharp, cutting into her whenever she tried to understand. Leave where? What wasn't safe? And why had her mother spent 21 years refusing to explain? The shelter nights blurred together now. Different cities, same desperation. She'd learned which churches offered free meals on Thursdays, which gas stations let you use the bathroom without buying anything, which street corners were safe to sleep near and which ones weren't. She'd learned to make herself small, invisible, unthreatening. She'd learned that hope was a luxury she couldn't afford. But the memories, those fragments that made no sense, those she couldn't shake. Sometimes, late at night on a shelter cot, Lucy would close her eyes and see flashes of something else. A big house with white columns. A garden with roses climbing a stone wall. A man's laughter, deep and warm. The feeling of being lifted high into the air, spinning, giggling. Then nothing. Just poverty. Just her mother working 3 jobs. Just the two of them in tiny apartments with leaking ceilings and broken heaters. Whenever Lucy asked about her early childhood, Kate's face would close up like a door slamming shut. Some things are better left in the past, baby. What matters is we're together and we're safe. Safe from what? Lucy never got the answer. The employment agency had been her last resort. We have a position, the tired woman behind the desk had said, barely looking up from her computer. Live-in Maid. Reynolds Estate. It's immediate. Are you interested? Lucy had said yes before the woman finished speaking. She would have said yes to anything. The shelter's 3-month limit was up in a week, and the street corner was calling her name. Now she stood in the servants' entrance of the Reynolds mansion, her small bag clutching everything she owned, as a stern Asian woman in her 50s looked her up and down with a critical eye. I'm Mrs. Chen, head housekeeper, the woman said, her voice clipped and efficient. You'll report directly to me. Your room is on the 3rd floor, servants' quarters. This is your uniform. She handed Lucy a brown dress with a white Peter Pan collar and a thin white belt. You'll wear this at all times while on duty. Understood? Yes, ma'am, Lucy whispered. Mrs. Chen's expression softened slightly, perhaps recognizing desperation when she saw it. The work is hard, but the pay is fair and you'll have meals and lodging. Mr. Reynolds values privacy and discretion above all else. You will stay invisible. You will work without complaint. And you will never, under any circumstances, ask personal questions about this family or this household. Is that clear? Lucy nodded quickly, her heart hammering. She couldn't lose this chance. This was salvation. This was survival. One more thing, Mrs. Chen added, her voice dropping lower. Mr. Reynolds has been through difficulties, loss. You may see things in this house. Photographs, rooms that are kept locked, personal items that are none of your concern. Curiosity is not welcome here. Do your job, keep your head down, and you'll be fine. Break these rules, and you'll be back on the street before sunset. Do we understand each other? Yes, ma'am. Completely. Mrs. Chen studied her for another long moment, then nodded. Good. Come. I'll show you to your room. You start tomorrow morning at 6. As Lucy followed the housekeeper through marble hallways and up a narrow back staircase, she tried to ignore the strange feeling creeping up her spine. Something about this place felt familiar. The way the light fell through the tall windows. The scent of lemon polish and old books. The echo of footsteps on marble. She shook her head, dismissing it. She was exhausted, emotional, desperate. Of course, everything felt strange. This was a different world entirely. A world where people lived in mansions instead of shelters, where meals came on schedule instead of whenever you could find them, where survival wasn't the only goal. Her mother's voice whispered in her memory. Sunshine. Never lose hope. Lucy touched the wall as she climbed the stairs, steadying herself. She wouldn't lose hope. She had a job now. A room. A chance. She had no idea that this mansion held secrets that would shatter everything she thought she knew. She had no idea that the man who owned this house had been searching for someone for 14 years. She had no idea that tomorrow, when she stepped into his private study to clean, her entire world would turn upside down. For now, she was just grateful to have a bed that wasn't in a shelter. For now, that was enough. But destiny, patient and persistent, was already waiting. Lucy's first morning began at 5:30, before dawn broke over the city. She dressed in the brown uniform with its crisp white collar, braided her hair back, and tried to calm the nervous flutter in her chest. By 6 o'clock, she was standing in the enormous kitchen alongside 3 other staff members as Mrs. Chen distributed the day's assignments. Lucy, you'll start with the main entrance and foyer, Mrs. Chen instructed. Polish the marble, dust the fixtures, then move to the east wing hallway. Maria will show you where supplies are kept." The moment Lucy stepped into the grand entrance foyer with its sweeping staircase and chandelier, something strange happened. Her feet stopped moving. Her breath caught. The black and white marble floor stretched before her in a pattern that made her head spin, not with dizziness, but with recognition. She'd stood here before. The thought came unbidden, certain, impossible. Lucy shook her head sharply. No. She'd never been in a place like this in her life. She was exhausted, overwhelmed by the mansion's grandeur. That's all it was. But as she began polishing the marble, her hands moved with odd confidence, as though they knew the rhythm, the motion, the way light reflected off the stone when it was clean. She paused, staring at her reflection in the gleaming floor, and for just a moment she saw something else. Smaller hands, a child's hands, patting the marble, a woman's voice saying, "Gentle, baby, gentle." Lucy blinked. The vision vanished. "You all right?" Maria, an older housekeeper, appeared beside her with a concerned expression. "You look pale." "I'm fine," Lucy said quickly. "Just adjusting." As the morning progressed, the feeling only intensified. When she moved to the windows overlooking the garden, she froze again. The rose bushes climbing the stone wall. The fountain with the angel statue. The brick pathway winding through flower beds. She knew this garden. Somehow, impossibly, she knew it. Her fingers pressed against the glass as fragmented images flickered through her mind. Running on that brick path, chasing butterflies, someone calling her name, laughter echoing. "Lucy!" Mrs. Chen's sharp voice snapped her back. "The windows won't clean themselves." "Sorry, ma'am." Lucy grabbed her cloth and worked faster, trying to push the strange sensations away. But they wouldn't stop. The scent of lemon polish mixed with old books made her throat tighten with unnamed emotion. The way afternoon light fell through the tall windows felt like a memory she couldn't quite grasp. Even the echo of her footsteps on the marble seemed to whisper, "You've walked here before, you've been here before, remember, remember, remember." By afternoon, Mrs. Chen assigned her to the grand staircase. Lucy climbed slowly, dusting each banister, each carved detail in the dark wood. Halfway up, her hand froze on the railing. The memory hit like a physical blow. Small legs climbing these exact stairs, a larger hand holding hers, guiding her, a deep voice saying, "Careful now, one step at a time, that's my girl." The feeling of safety, of being loved, of being home. Lucy gasped, stumbling backward. The feathered duster clattered down the stairs. "Girl, what's wrong with you today?" Another maid, Teresa, appeared at the bottom of the staircase. "You've been acting strange since this morning." "I'm sorry, I just—" Lucy pressed her palm to her forehead. "I don't know. I keep feeling like I've been here before." Teresa's expression shifted to something unreadable. "That's impossible. This is your first day." "I know that," Lucy said, descending to retrieve the duster. "I know it doesn't make sense. I'm probably just tired." But Teresa was watching her carefully now, something like concern or perhaps worry in her eyes. "Maybe you should rest during lunch break. This house, it affects people sometimes. Lots of history in these walls." That afternoon, Lucy was collecting linens from the second floor when she heard footsteps approaching. She pressed herself against the wall, remembering Mrs. Chen's instruction to stay invisible, as a man rounded the corner. Stephen Reynolds. Even having never seen him before, Lucy knew immediately who he was. The distinguished silver hair, the expensive suit, the air of quiet authority. He was on his phone, speaking in low tones about a business matter, and would have passed without noticing her at all. Except he glanced up. Their eyes met for just a second. Stephen Reynolds stopped walking. His phone conversation faltered mid-sentence. He stared at Lucy with an expression she couldn't read. Surprise, confusion, something deeper and more painful that made her chest constrict. I'll call you back, he said into the phone, his voice suddenly hoarse. Lucy dropped her gaze immediately, heart pounding. Excuse me, sir. I'm sorry, I'll get out of your way. Wait. His voice was soft but commanding. She froze, terrified she'd already broken some unspoken rule. What's your name? He asked. Lucy, sir. Lucy Morrison. I'm the new maid. A long silence stretched between them. Lucy kept her eyes down, but she could feel his gaze on her face, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Lucy, he repeated, and something in the way he said her name made her shiver. That voice. She knew that voice. But from where? How long have you worked here? He asked. This is my first day, sir. Another pause. Then, I see. Welcome to the household, Lucy. He walked past her, but she heard his footsteps slow, heard him stop at the end of the hallway. When she dared to glance up, he was looking back at her, his hand gripping the doorframe like he needed support. Their eyes met again, and for a heartbeat, Lucy felt the world tilt. Those eyes. Gray-green, troubled, searching. She knew those eyes. Then he disappeared into his study, and the moment broke. That night, lying in her narrow bed in the servants' quarters, Lucy couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the mansion's hallways, the garden, the staircase. But not as they were today. As they had been in another time, seen through smaller eyes, filled with different sounds and different light. When sleep finally came, she dreamed. She was running through a house, this house, her small legs pumping, laughing breathlessly. Someone was chasing her, playfully, voice booming with joy. I'm going to catch you. Giggling, shrieking with delight. Then strong arms lifted her high, spinning her around and around until the room blurred into colors. My sunshine, the voice said. My beautiful sunshine. Lucy woke with tears on her face and a word on her lips. Daddy. 3 days passed in a blur of work and unsettling recognition. Lucy scrubbed floors that her hands seemed to know, polished windows that framed views her eyes had seen before, and avoided Stephen Reynolds, who had left for a business trip the morning after their brief encounter. She told herself she was imagining things. Stress. Exhaustion. The mind playing tricks when the body was pushed too hard for too long. But the dreams kept coming. Every night, the same house, the same laughter, the same arms lifting her high. On Thursday morning, Mrs. Chen appeared in the kitchen with a ring of keys and an unusual request. Lucy, Mr. Reynolds is out of town until Monday. His private study needs a deep clean. It hasn't been properly done in months. I'm trusting you with this task. She handed over a key. Don't touch anything on his desk. Don't move any papers. Just dust, polish, and vacuum. Understood. Lucy's hands trembled slightly as she took the key. Yes, ma'am. And Lucy. Mrs. Chen's voice softened just a fraction. That room is important to Mr. Reynolds. Be respectful. The study was on the second floor, down a quiet hallway Lucy had been avoiding all week. The door was solid oak, heavy, the kind that protected secrets. She unlocked it slowly, pushing it open with a creak that seemed too loud in the silent corridor. The room took her breath away. Wood-paneled walls rose to a coffered ceiling. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined 3 walls, filled with leather-bound legal volumes and first editions. A massive mahogany desk sat before tall windows overlooking the garden. Framed law degrees hung in neat rows. Everything smelled of leather, old paper, and something else, something that made Lucy's chest ache with unnamed longing. She began methodically, the way Mrs. Chen had taught her. Dust the books first, then the frames, then the furniture. Work from top to bottom, left to right. Stay focused. Stay professional. The frames on the walls were mostly certificates and diplomas. Stephen Reynolds, Harvard Law School. Stephen Reynolds, various bar associations. Awards for philanthropy, for business excellence, for community service. Lucy dusted each one carefully, barely looking at them, until she reached the wall behind the desk. This wall was different, personal. Family photographs in elegant frames. A younger Stephen Reynolds shaking hands with the governor. Stephen at a ribbon-cutting ceremony. Stephen at a charity gala. And then, between two larger frames, a smaller portrait in an ornate gold frame. Lucy's feather duster stopped moving. The photograph showed a young black girl, perhaps 7 years old, wearing a white dress with a Peter Pan collar. The child sat formally, hands folded in her lap, but her smile was pure joy, bright, innocent, full of life and love. Her hair was styled in neat braids with ribbons. Her eyes sparkled with happiness. The girl was Lucy. The feather duster slipped from Lucy's fingers, hitting the hardwood floor with a soft thud she barely heard over the roaring in her ears. Her legs felt weak. Her vision tunneled. This was impossible. Completely, utterly impossible. She stepped closer, hand reaching out, stopping just before touching the glass. The portrait was professional, the kind taken at a photography studio. She could see the photographer's embossed mark in the corner. Portrait Elegance, 2010. She would have been 7 years old, but she had no memory of this photograph. No memory of wearing that dress, sitting for that portrait, smiling at that camera. Nothing. Just empty space where the memory should be. Lucy stumbled backward, her hip hitting the desk. She spun to face the window, staring at her reflection in the glass. Same wide-set eyes. Same high cheekbones. Same full lips. The bone structure was identical. The child's face aged 14 years into the young woman staring back at her now. "No," she whispered. "No, this can't be real." But even as she spoke, memories began crashing through the walls she'd built around them. Not gentle this time. Not fragments. Full, vivid, overwhelming. This room. These bookshelves. That desk. A man sitting there, reading documents, and a small girl, herself, bursting through the door with a piece of paper clutched in her hand. "Daddy, look what I drew. It's you and me and Mommy in the garden." The man, Stephen Reynolds, younger, his hair still dark, turning with a brilliant smile. "Come here, sunshine. Let me see." Climbing into his lap. His arms around her. The scent of his cologne. His voice warm and proud. "This is beautiful, Lucy. We'll put it on the refrigerator, right next to all your other masterpieces. Do you really like it, Daddy?" "I love it. Just like I love you, my sunshine." Lucy gasped, her hand flying to her mouth as the memory released her. She gripped the edge of the desk to keep from falling, her breath coming in short, painful bursts. The portrait stared at her from the wall, undeniable proof of an impossible truth. She lived here. In this house. In this mansion. She sat in this study on her father's lap. Stephen Reynolds wasn't a stranger. He was. "No," she said again, louder this time, as if volume could make it less true. "No, no, no." But her eyes found the portrait again, and this time she saw what she'd missed before. Tucked in the corner of the frame, almost hidden, was a tiny engraved nameplate. Lucy Reynolds, age 7. Lucy Reynolds. Not Morrison. Reynolds. Her legs gave out completely. She sank to the floor, her back against the desk, staring up at the portrait of a child she'd been but couldn't remember being. A child who'd lived in this mansion, who'd called Stephen Reynolds Daddy, who'd been loved and safe and home. Until one night, when her mother packed their bags and they disappeared into poverty, and Lucy's entire first 7 years of life were erased like words wiped from a chalkboard. The truth crashed over her like a wave. Stephen Reynolds was her father. This mansion was her home. And somewhere in the 14 years since they'd left, she'd forgotten everything, until she walked back through these doors and the house itself began whispering her own history back to her. Lucy pressed both hands to her face and finally let herself cry, surrounded by the memories of a life she'd lost and a father who'd never stopped keeping her portrait on his wall. Lucy didn't know how long she sat on the floor of the study, tears streaming down her face as 14 years of buried memories fought their way to the surface. Minutes or hours. Time had lost all meaning. Eventually, her sobs quieted into shaky breaths, and a desperate need for answers pulled her to her feet. She had to know. Had to understand. Why did her mother take her? Why did they run? Why had Kate spent 14 years keeping the secret, even as they struggled to survive, even as she lay dying? Lucy's eyes swept the study with new purpose. If answers existed, they would be here, in this room that smelled of her father's cologne and held her childhood portrait like a shrine. The desk drawers were locked, but the filing cabinets against the wall were not. Lucy's hands shook as she pulled open the first drawer, finding folders organized by year. She flipped through them, household expenses, property documents, business contracts, until she found a folder labeled simply Staff Records, Archive. Inside were employment files going back decades. Lucy's fingers fumbled through them until she found it, a manila folder marked Morrison Kate. The photograph clipped to the file made Lucy's breath catch. Her mother, impossibly young, maybe 25, smiling at the camera. Beautiful. Healthy. Alive. Nothing like the exhausted, sick woman Lucy had watched fade away in that hospital bed. Employment date: January 2003. Position: personal maid. Departure date: March 15, 2010. Reason: departed without notice. And beneath that, in different handwriting, more urgent: missing person report filed March 16, 2010. Subject: Lucy Reynolds, age 7, daughter of employer. Believed taken by Kate Morrison. Police investigation ongoing. Private investigators hired. The words swam before Lucy's eyes. Lucy Reynolds. Her real name. The name her mother had erased, along with everything else. She sank into the leather chair behind the desk, clutching the file. More memories crashed over her now, relentless as waves. Her bedroom, she could see it clearly now, with pink walls and white furniture, stuffed animals lined up on the bed, a bookshelf filled with picture books. The garden where she'd played, chasing butterflies, her mother watching from the kitchen window while she worked. Stephen coming home from the office, lifting her high, calling her his sunshine. The three of them together. A family. Secret, perhaps, but real. Lucy's hands moved on their own, opening more drawers, searching for more pieces of the puzzle. In the bottom drawer, hidden beneath folders of old tax documents, her fingers found something else, a small leather journal, worn and water-stained. She pulled it out, her heart hammering. The cover bore no label, but when she opened it, she recognized her mother's handwriting immediately. The first entry was dated January 2009. I know I shouldn't keep this journal. Stephen would worry if he knew how afraid I've been lately. But I need to write it down, need to see if I'm being paranoid or if the danger is real. Lucy's hands trembled as she flipped through the pages, her mother's words painting a picture she'd never imagined. March 2009. The man was outside the gate again today. The same one from last week. Watching. Stephen says it's probably nothing, just neighborhood security, but I don't believe that. He looked at Lucy when I took her to the park. Really looked at her. Like he was making sure he'd recognize her later. September 2009. Stephen's business partner mentioned Lucy today. How did he even know about her? We've been so careful. Stephen says I'm overreacting, that David is just making conversation, but the way he smiled when he said her name. I can't shake this feeling. January 2010. The phone call came today. A man's voice, calm and cold. We know about the girl. Stephen's illegitimate daughter. That's valuable information, isn't it? Information that could be used, or kept quiet for the right price. I hung up. Stephen wants to go to the police, but what if that makes it worse? What if they hurt Lucy to prove they're serious? Lucy's vision blurred with tears, but she kept reading. March 10, 2010. They sent a photograph. Lucy at school. Lucy in the garden. Lucy sleeping in her bedroom, which means they've been inside the house. I can't breathe. I can't think. Stephen is hiring security, calling the police, but I know how these things work. Men with money and connections can make anyone disappear. Lucy is 7 years old. She can't defend herself. She doesn't understand danger. March 14, 2010. I've made my decision. Stephen will hate me. Lucy will hate me. But I have to take her somewhere they'll never find us. I have to disappear completely. Change our names. Start over. Lives small and poor and invisible. It's the only way to keep her alive. They can't use her against Stephen if they can't find her. March 15, 2010. Tonight. While Stephen is at the charity gala. I've packed 2 bags. I've withdrawn cash. I've planned a route that avoids cameras. I'm leaving Stephen a note, but I can't tell him where we're going. If I do, he'll come after us and they'll be watching him. God forgive me. I'm so sorry, Stephen. I'm so sorry, Lucy. This is the only way to keep you alive. Someday, maybe you'll understand. Someday, maybe you'll forgive me. The journal ended there. No more entries. Just blank pages and the ghost of her mother's terror. Lucy closed the journal slowly, pressing it against her chest as sobs racked her body. Her mother hadn't abandoned Stephen. She hadn't run away because she didn't love him. She'd been protecting Lucy, sacrificing everything, comfort, security, love, health, to keep her daughter safe from men who would have used a 7-year-old child as a weapon. And Lucy had spent her whole life not knowing, not understanding, living in poverty while her mother carried the weight of this terrible choice alone. I'm sorry, Mama, Lucy whispered to the empty study. I'm so sorry I didn't know. I'm sorry I couldn't help you. I'm sorry you had to do it all alone. She looked up at her childhood portrait on the wall, at the innocent girl who had no idea that in just days, her entire world would shatter. That girl had been loved, protected, home. And now, 14 years later, that girl had found her way back, but the mother who'd sacrificed everything to save her was gone, and the father who'd never stopped searching was about to discover that his missing daughter had been sleeping in his servants' quarters, invisible and forgotten, just 3 floors above his head. Lucy sat frozen in her father's chair, Kate's diary still pressed against her chest, when her eyes caught something else in the bottom drawer. A stack of black leather journals, identical in size, numbered on the spines. 1 through 14. 14 journals. 1 for each year. Her hands trembled as she pulled out the first volume, dated March 16, 2010, the day after her mother had taken her and disappeared. Day 1. Lucy is gone. Kate took her sometime last night while I was at the Hartwell Foundation Gala. I came home to find Lucy's bedroom empty, Kate's belongings gone, and a note that said only, I have to keep her safe. Don't look for us. I'm sorry. The police say I have to wait 24 hours to file a missing person report for Lucy because Kate is her mother. 24 hours. My daughter could be anywhere by then. Day 3. Detective Morris says Kate withdrew $15,000 in cash 2 days before she left. No credit card activity since. No phone calls. No trace. She planned this. How long was she planning to take my daughter from me? Day 15. The investigators found nothing. It's like they vanished into thin air. I hired 3 more firms today. I don't care what it costs. I will find my daughter. Lucy's tears fell onto the pages as she flipped through months of entries, each one documenting her father's growing desperation. Day 127. Lucy's birthday. She's 8 years old today. I bought her a present, a stuffed elephant, her favorite animal. It's sitting in her room with all the others I've bought, waiting for her to come home. Day 365. 1 year. The police have closed the case. They say Kate had every legal right to take Lucy. She's the mother, I'm just the father who never went to court for custody because we were trying to avoid scandal. The scandal doesn't matter anymore. Nothing matters except finding my daughter. Lucy reached for the second journal with shaking hands. Day 892. Every time I see a little girl with braids, my heart stops. It's never her. The private investigator, Collins, thinks Kate might have changed Lucy's name. How do I find my daughter when I don't even know what she's called now? Day 1247. Another investigator found nothing. Kate changed their names completely. No social security records, no school enrollments, nothing. It's like they vanished from existence. Lucy would be 11 now. Does she remember me? Does she hate me for not protecting her from whatever scared Kate so badly? By the time Lucy opened the 7th journal, she was sobbing openly, her heart breaking for the man who had written these words year after year, never giving up, never stopping. Day 2738. I saw a girl today at the grocery store who looked like Lucy might look now. Same eyes, same smile. My heart stopped. I followed her and her mother for 3 aisles before I realized it wasn't her. The woman called security. I don't blame her. I probably looked insane. It's never her. It's never, ever her. Day 3205. I've been reading about parental abduction cases. Most children who are taken this way never come home. The parent who takes them creates an entirely new life, new identity, and the child grows up never knowing they were taken. Lucy probably doesn't even remember me anymore. She was only 7. But I remember her. I remember everything. Day 3891. I keep her room exactly as it was. Mrs. Chen thinks I'm torturing myself, but I can't change it. What if Lucy comes home and her room is gone? What if she thinks I forgot her? Lucy found what she was looking for in Journal 12, the truth about the threats that had terrified her mother into running. Day 4015. I finally understand why Kate ran. I found the files my head of security kept from me. The threatening phone calls, the surveillance photos of Lucy, the extortion attempts. My business rival, Marcus Thornton, was trying to force me out of the Hartwell Tower development by threatening my illegitimate daughter. He had men watching our house, watching Lucy at school. Kate must have been terrified, and I dismissed her fears as paranoia. God forgive me, I didn't take it seriously enough until it was too late. Day 4016. Thornton is in prison now. Securities fraud unrelated to Lucy, but he'll be there for 15 years. The threat is gone. But so is my daughter. I'd give anything to tell Kate she's safe now, to tell her to come home. But I don't know where she is. The final journal, number 14, was only half filled. The most recent entry was dated just 3 days ago. Day 5110. 14 years today since Lucy disappeared. She's 21 now. A woman. I wouldn't even recognize her if I passed her on the street. But I keep searching anyway. I've hired a new investigator. The best in the country, they say. I don't have much hope left, but I can't stop. I've kept her portrait on my wall. I've kept her room exactly as it was. Someday, somehow, I'll find my daughter. Or maybe, if there's any mercy in this world, she'll find me. Lucy closed the journal slowly, pressing her palms against her eyes as sobs racked her body. Her father hadn't abandoned her. He hadn't moved on. For 14 years he'd searched every day, loved her every day, hoped every day. He'd kept her room like a shrine. He'd bought birthday presents she never received. He'd seen her face in every child who passed him on the street. And 3 days ago, he'd written that maybe she would find him. Lucy looked up at her portrait on the wall, then around the study that her father had filled with journals documenting his relentless search for a daughter he'd never stopped loving. "I'm here, Daddy," she whispered to the empty room, her voice breaking. "I'm here. I've been here all along. I just didn't remember. But I remember now. I remember everything." She stood on trembling legs, wiping her eyes. Stephen Reynolds was returning from his business trip in 3 days. And when he did, Lucy would tell him the truth that would change both their lives forever. His missing daughter hadn't found him by accident. Destiny had guided her home, disguised as a homeless girl desperate for work, and she'd been sleeping under his roof for a week, invisible and unnamed, while he wrote in his journal about hope that she might someday return. The search was over. His daughter was home. He just didn't know it yet. Stephen Reynolds returned on a gray Monday morning, his car pulling through the gates just after dawn. Lucy watched from the kitchen window, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. She'd spent the entire weekend in the study, reading and rereading her mother's diary, memorizing every word, every date, every desperate decision that had torn their family apart. Now she knew the truth. But knowing and speaking were entirely different things. How do you walk up to a man and say, "I'm the daughter you lost 14 years ago. I've been here for 2 weeks, cleaning your floors, and I didn't know who I was until I saw my own face on your wall." Mrs. Chen had been unusually quiet since discovering Lucy hadn't finished cleaning the study. She'd found her there Sunday evening, red-eyed and surrounded by files. "Put those back," was all she'd said, her voice strange and tight. "And don't speak of what you found. Not yet. Not until you're certain." But Lucy was certain. The memories had fully returned now, vivid and complete. She knew the house because she'd lived here. She knew the garden because she'd played there. She knew Stephen Reynolds because he was her father. And today, watching him step out of his car, she saw him differently. Not as the billionaire employer, but as the man who'd read her bedtime stories, who'd called her sunshine, who'd kept her portrait on his wall for 14 years while searching for her across an entire country. Throughout the morning, Lucy tried to stay invisible, but invisibility had become impossible. Her body betrayed her, gravitating toward wherever Stephen was. When he took coffee in the library, she found excuses to dust nearby shelves. When he made phone calls in the sitting room, she appeared to water plants that didn't need watering. And every time she felt his eyes on her. It was during dinner service that everything shifted. Lucy was helping Teresa bring dishes from the kitchen when she entered the dining room where Stephen sat alone, reading documents while he ate. The chandelier cast warm light across the table, and for a moment, the scene was so familiar it made her dizzy. How many times had she burst into this room as a child, interrupting his dinners to show him something she'd drawn or built? She set down the water pitcher with shaking hands. Stephen looked up and their eyes met. The world stopped. His fork clattered against his plate. His face went pale. For a long moment, neither of them moved, trapped in a current of recognition that felt electric, dangerous, impossible to ignore. Lucy saw his eyes trace her features. Her face, her bone structure, the curve of her jaw. She watched the confusion become something else. Something like hope and terror and desperate longing all at once. "That's all, Lucy," Teresa said quickly, breaking the moment. "We need to get the dessert plates." Lucy fled to the kitchen, her breath coming in gasps. But the damage was done. The recognition was mutual now. Unavoidable. An hour later, Lucy was cleaning the hallway outside the dining room when she heard Stephen's voice. speaking low and urgent on his phone. "Michael, I need you to pull something for me. The portrait in my study. Lucy's portrait. I need a high-resolution digital copy sent to my phone immediately. Yes, tonight. It's important." Lucy pressed herself against the wall, heart racing. Minutes later, she saw him from the corner of her eye, standing in the hallway with his phone, looking between the screen and the spot where she stood pretending to polish a mirror. His hand trembled. His jaw clenched. She could see him fighting with himself, wanting to believe but afraid to hope. He'd been hurt by false leads before. She knew that from his journals. Women who resembled Kate, children who looked like Lucy might look, all of them nothing. Just cruel tricks of circumstance and desperate imagination. But this time was different, and they both felt it. Over the next 3 days, the tension became unbearable. They circled each other like magnets with opposite poles, drawn together but terrified of the collision. Stephen found reasons to be in whatever room Lucy was cleaning. Lucy found reasons to linger wherever Stephen was working. Mrs. Chen noticed first. "What's going on between you two?" she asked Lucy one afternoon, her voice sharp with concern. "Mr. Reynolds can't stop staring at you, and you look like you're about to cry every time he walks by." "I don't know what you mean," Lucy whispered, but the lie tasted bitter. The other staff noticed too. Whispers followed Lucy through the hallways. "Have you seen the way he looks at her? It's like he's seen a ghost. She looks familiar though, doesn't she? Something about her face." "Don't be ridiculous. She's just a maid." On Wednesday evening, Lucy was dusting the library when Stephen entered. She moved to leave, but his voice stopped her. "Lucy." Just her name, but spoken like a prayer. Like a question. Like a hope he was terrified to voice. She turned slowly, meeting his eyes. "How old are you?" he asked, his voice rough. 21, sir." His breath shuddered. "When's your birthday?" "December 12th, 2003. She watched his knees nearly buckle. Watched his hand grip the doorframe for support. December 12th. His daughter's birthday. "Your mother," he said, each word seeming to cost him everything. "What was her name?" Lucy's eyes filled with tears. "Kate. Kate Morrison." The sound that escaped Stephen Reynolds was barely human. Half sob, half gasp, entirely broken. He staggered backward, pressing his hand over his mouth, staring at her like she was a miracle and a ghost and an impossibility all at once. "It's you," he whispered. "Oh God. It's really you. Lucy. My Lucy." And Lucy, who'd been holding herself together for days, finally broke. "Daddy," she whispered, the word she'd been holding back since she found the portrait. "I'm home. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I didn't remember. But I'm home." Stephen crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms, and Lucy finally stopped running from the truth. They stood in the library for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, Stephen holding Lucy like she might disappear if he loosened his grip, both of them crying too hard to speak. When they finally pulled apart, Stephen's face was wet with tears, his hands still gripping her shoulders as though he needed to confirm she was real. "I need to show you something," Lucy said, her voice shaking. "There's a room I've been afraid to enter since I got here. But I think I'm ready now." Stephen nodded, not trusting his voice. Together they climbed the main staircase, not the servants' stairs Lucy had been using, but the grand marble steps she'd climbed as a child. Each step brought more memories flooding back. Racing up these stairs, Stephen chasing her playfully, her small legs pumping as she giggled breathlessly. At the top of the stairs, Lucy turned left without thinking, her feet knowing the way. Down the hallway. Past the guest rooms. To the door at the end. the one with a crystal doorknob that had always felt magical in her small hands. Stephen's hand shook as he reached past her to open it. The door swung inward with a soft creak. Lucy's breath caught. Tears spilled down her cheeks before she even crossed the threshold. The room was exactly as she remembered. Exactly as it had been 14 years ago, preserved like a shrine to a childhood frozen in time. Pink walls. White furniture with delicate carved details. A canopy bed with sheer curtains, stuffed animals arranged carefully on the pillows. A teddy bear, a rabbit, an elephant she'd named Peanut. A bookshelf filled with picture books, their spines bright and colorful. A small desk in the corner with a cup of crayons, colored pencils, markers all waiting to be used. And on the walls, her drawings. Dozens of them, carefully framed or pinned with decorative tacks. Crayon pictures of flowers and houses and stick figure families. A finger painting of a rainbow. A watercolor of the garden she'd done when she was 6, the colors bleeding together but unmistakably hers. "I couldn't touch anything," Stephen said quietly behind her, his voice thick with emotion. "I kept thinking, maybe if I left everything exactly as it was, you'd come back. Maybe if I preserved this room, this moment, somehow you'd find your way home." Lucy walked slowly into the room, her fingers trailing over surfaces she'd touched as a child. The desk where she'd drawn pictures. The bed where her father had read her stories. The toy chest where she'd kept her favorite dolls. She sank onto the small bed, and it all came rushing back with devastating clarity. Her 4th birthday party in the garden, Stephen lifting her onto his shoulders so she could see over the crowd of household staff who'd gathered to celebrate. Her mother bringing out a cake shaped like a butterfly, her face glowing with happiness despite the secrecy they all maintained. Her father teaching her to read, the two of them sitting in his study while he pointed to words in picture books, his voice patient and warm. "Sound it out, sunshine. You can do it." Her mother braiding her hair in the servants' quarters before bed, humming softly, while Lucy chattered about everything she'd done that day. "Daddy says I'm getting so smart, Mama. He says I'm going to be a lawyer like him someday." Birthdays and bedtimes and ordinary moments made extraordinary by love. But then the memories turned dark. She was 7 years old, sleeping peacefully in this very bed when her mother shook her awake, face pale with terror in the dim light. "Baby, we have to go. Right now. Don't ask questions. Just trust Mama." Kate throwing clothes into a bag with shaking hands while Lucy stood in her pajamas, confused and frightened. "But what about Daddy? We have to tell Daddy." "We can't, baby. I'm so sorry, but we can't." Running through the dark mansion, her mother's hand gripping hers so tightly it hurt. Out the servants' entrance. Into a waiting car. Looking back at the only home she'd ever known, not understanding that she'd never see it again. The years that followed crashed over Lucy like waves. Cheap motels. Different names. Her mother constantly looking over her shoulder, jumping at loud noises, afraid to stay in one place too long. Lucy's memories from before age 7 fading like photographs left in the sun. Her mother never speaking of their old life, the mansion becoming dreamlike and unreal. We had to leave. It wasn't safe. Moving from shelter to shelter after the money ran out. Her mother working 2, then 3 jobs, getting thinner, getting sicker, coughing at night while Lucy pretended to sleep. The cough that never went away. The trips to free clinics that could never do enough. The weight loss, the exhaustion, the slow deterioration of a woman who'd sacrificed everything. And finally, that hospital room. Kate's hand in hers, paper-thin and trembling. Those last whispered words that Lucy had carried for 3 years without understanding. "I did what I thought was right. I was trying to protect you. Forgive me. I love you, Sunshine." Sunshine. The nickname Lucy had forgotten Stephen used to call her. The same nickname her dying mother had used, trying to bridge the gap between the life they'd lost and the life they'd been forced to live. Lucy curled up on her childhood bed, hugging Peanut the elephant to her chest, and sobbed. For the little girl who'd lost everything without understanding why. For the mother who'd carried the weight of an impossible choice until it killed her. For the father who'd spent 14 years searching for a daughter who'd been erased from existence. Stephen sat beside her on the small bed, his large frame making the child-sized furniture seem impossibly tiny, and pulled her close. "She loved you," Lucy whispered through her tears. "She loved us both. She thought she was protecting me. The diary said there were threats, dangerous men who knew about me, who would have used me against you." "I know," Stephen said, his voice breaking. "I found her diary 2 years ago, when I was searching the study for any clue about where she might have gone. I know she was protecting you. And I know she's gone now." He pressed his face against Lucy's hair. "But you're here. Against all odds, through everything, you found your way back home." Lucy lifted her head, looking around the preserved room through new eyes. "You never stopped looking for me." "Never," Stephen said firmly. "Not for one single day. You were missing, but you were never forgotten. Never unloved. Never not wanted. And in that pink bedroom, surrounded by the artifacts of a childhood stolen and now reclaimed, Lucy finally understood she hadn't been abandoned. She'd been protected. She hadn't been forgotten. She'd been searched for. And she wasn't homeless anymore, because home had been waiting here all along, preserved in pink walls and stuffed animals and a father's unbreakable hope. The evening light filtered through the tall windows of Stephen's study, casting long shadows across the mahogany walls. Lucy stood outside the door, her hand raised to knock, her heart hammering so violently she thought she might be sick. She'd been living in this house for 3 weeks now. 3 weeks of memories returning in waves. 3 weeks of circling the truth with her father, both of them too afraid to speak what they both suspected. But after standing in her childhood bedroom, after holding Peanut the elephant and remembering everything, Lucy couldn't stay silent anymore. The truth needed to be spoken, claimed, made real. She knocked softly. "Come in," Stephen's voice called from inside. Lucy pushed open the door and found him exactly where she'd known he would be, sitting at his desk beneath her portrait, staring up at the 7-year-old girl in the white dress like he did every evening. She'd watched him from the hallway several times, seen the way his fingers traced the edge of the frame, seen the grief that lived in his eyes. He looked up when she entered, and something in his expression shifted. Recognition, hope, fear all tangled together. "Mr. Reynolds," Lucy said, her voice shaking despite her best efforts to stay calm. "I need to talk to you about something. Something important." Stephen set down the pen he'd been holding. His jaw tightened. "Of course. Please sit." But Lucy couldn't sit. If she sat, she might lose her courage. She took a step closer instead, her eyes moving from Stephen's face to the portrait on the wall above him. "That portrait," she said, each word feeling like jumping off a cliff. "That little girl in the white dress, smiling at the camera." She met his eyes, saw them widen with something like terror and hope. "It's me. I'm Lucy. I'm your daughter." For a moment, the world held its breath. Stephen's face drained of all color. His hands gripped the edge of the desk so tightly his knuckles went white. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. No sound came out. "What?" His voice cracked. He tried again. "What did you say?" Lucy's tears began to fall, but she kept speaking, the words pouring out now like water through a broken dam. "My mother was Kate Morrison. We lived here when I was little. You're my father. I remember now. I remember everything. You used to spin me around in the garden. You called me sunshine. You read me bedtime stories and taught me to sound out words and carried me on your shoulders. Stephen stood slowly, his legs shaking visibly. Lucy, he whispered, like he was afraid the name might shatter if he spoke it too loud. I remember the night we left, Lucy continued, tears streaming down her face now. My mother woke me up, terrified. She said we had to go, that it wasn't safe. I didn't understand. I wanted to tell you goodbye, but she said we couldn't. We just ran. She took me away. She changed our names. She spent 14 years looking over her shoulder, afraid, moving us constantly. Lucy's voice broke. She worked herself to death trying to keep me safe from the people who'd threatened us. She got sick from the stress and the poverty and never having enough money for doctors. She died 3 years ago in a charity hospital, holding my hand, apologizing for things I didn't understand. Stephen's hand moved to his mouth, stifling a sound of pure anguish. I've been homeless ever since, Lucy whispered, living in shelters, barely surviving. I didn't know who I was. I didn't remember any of this. The mansion, you, my childhood. It was like the first 7 years of my life had been erased. Until I came here. Until I saw that portrait and everything came flooding back. Stephen stared at her, his chest heaving, his eyes searching her face with desperate intensity. Your birthday, he said hoarsely. When's your birthday? December 12, 2003. His knees buckled slightly. He caught himself on the desk. Your middle name? His voice was barely audible. Grace. Lucy Grace Reynolds. The full name felt foreign on her tongue. A name she'd only recently remembered existed. Oh God. Stephen's hand pressed against his chest. Oh God. Lucy. My Lucy. His voice shattered completely. I've searched for you for 14 years. Every day. Every single day. Private investigators. Police. Missing person reports across every state. I thought your mother took you because she didn't want us anymore. I didn't know. I didn't know the threats were that serious. I didn't know she was protecting you. He moved around the desk with trembling steps, pulling open a drawer with shaking hands. Inside was a worn folder, and from it he pulled photographs. Lucy as a newborn, as a toddler, as a little girl in various stages of childhood. Pictures of Stephen holding baby Lucy, reading to her, pushing her on a swing. You have my eyes, he said, his voice thick with tears. Your mother's smile. Her dimples. The same birthmark on your left wrist that my mother had, and her mother before her. His hands shook as he held up a photo. This was your second birthday. You got frosting all over your face and my suit. I didn't care. I've never been so happy. Lucy looked at the photo, at the man who'd been her father before she forgot him, at the baby she'd been before everything fell apart. You kept looking for me, she whispered. Even after all these years. I never stopped. Stephen's voice broke. You were my daughter. My sunshine. How could I ever stop? Every birthday, every Christmas, every moment of every day, I wondered where you were. If you were safe. If you were happy. If you even remembered me. I forgot, Lucy sobbed. I'm so sorry. The memories just disappeared. But being here, seeing the portrait, it all came back. And I know now. I know Mama didn't take me because she didn't love you. She did it to protect me. She loved us both so much she gave up everything. Stephen crossed the distance between them in 3 strides and pulled Lucy into his arms. The embrace she'd been missing for 14 years without knowing it. The father she'd forgotten but her heart had never stopped searching for. My sunshine, he whispered against her hair, his whole body shaking with sobs. My daughter. My Lucy. You're home. You're finally home." And Lucy, who'd been lost for so long she'd forgotten she'd ever belonged anywhere, held on to her father and let herself believe it. She was home. The DNA test was just a formality. Stephen had it arranged within hours of their reunion, not because he doubted. He could see himself in Lucy's face, could see Kate in her smile, could feel the truth in his bones, but because Lucy needed the official confirmation. Needed proof that this wasn't just desperate hope or convenient coincidence. When the results came back 3 days later, Stephen found Lucy in the garden, sitting on the same bench where Kate used to watch her play 14 years ago. 99.9% probability of paternity, he said quietly, handing her the envelope. Though I already knew. I've known since the moment you said your name. Lucy took the paper with trembling hands, staring at the scientific proof of what her heart had already accepted. "It's real," she whispered. "All of it. I'm really your daughter." "You're really my daughter," Stephen confirmed, his voice thick with emotion. "And you're never sleeping in those servants' quarters again." That afternoon, Lucy's few belongings were moved from the tiny third-floor room back to her childhood bedroom. The brown maid's uniform was folded away, replaced by new clothes Stephen had ordered. Not designer labels or excessive luxury, but comfortable, quality items that fit her properly. Lucy stood in her pink bedroom, now hers again officially, and touched the stuffed animal she'd slept beside as a child. "I had it all cleaned and updated," Stephen said from the doorway. "New mattress, new linens. But I kept everything else exactly as it was. Your drawings. Your books. Everything." Lucy turned to face him, tears in her eyes. "You waited for me. I never stopped waiting." That evening, Stephen called the household staff together in the main sitting room. Lucy stood beside him, her hand in his, as he made the announcement that would change everything. "Many of you remember my daughter Lucy, who disappeared 14 years ago when she was 7 years old. Some of you helped search for her. All of you watched me grieve." His voice was steady but emotional. "I want you to know that Lucy has been found. She's been here in this house for 3 weeks. She's been working as a maid, not knowing who she was, not remembering her childhood here. But her memories have returned. She is my daughter. And she is home." The silence that followed lasted only a heartbeat before Mrs. Chen gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "The new girl," she whispered. "Lucy Morrison. I should have. The resemblance. Oh my God." Then she was crying, and Teresa was crying, and Maria, who'd worked in the house since before Lucy was born, was sobbing openly. "Little Lucy," Maria said, pulling Lucy into a fierce embrace. "I watched you grow. I taught you how to fold napkins. You called me Auntie Maria. You're here. You're really here." The staff who remembered her gathered around, touching her hands, her face, crying and laughing at once. The younger staff watched in amazement as the household transformed before their eyes. The invisible maid becoming the daughter of the house, the lost child returned. But there was one more thing Lucy needed to do before she could truly come home. The cemetery was quiet on Saturday morning. Stephen drove, his hand occasionally reaching over to grip Lucy's, as though he still feared she might disappear if he didn't hold on. They walked together through rows of headstones until they found it, a simple marker in a section for people who died without means. Kate Morrison, 1978 to 2021. Beloved mother. Lucy had scraped together money for that marker, choosing the words carefully. Now, seeing it, she realized how inadequate it was. How much it failed to capture who Kate had been, what she'd sacrificed, the impossible weight she'd carried alone. Stephen knelt in the grass, and Lucy knelt beside him. For a long moment neither spoke. Then Stephen cleared his throat, his voice rough with emotion. "Kate," he began, speaking to the woman he'd loved and lost twice. "I understand now. You weren't running from me. You weren't taking Lucy away out of spite or anger or because you didn't love us. You were protecting our daughter. The threats were real. You were terrified. And you did what you thought was the only way to keep her safe." His voice broke, but he continued. "You sacrificed everything. Your comfort, your security, your health, your life, to protect our child. You lived in poverty. You worked yourself to exhaustion. You got sick and couldn't afford proper treatment. You died alone, and I wasn't there. I'm so sorry, Kate. I'm so sorry I didn't protect you both better. I'm sorry you had to carry that burden by yourself." Tears streamed down Lucy's face as she listened to her father speak to her mother's memory. "But I want you to know," Stephen said, his hand finding Lucy's and gripping it tightly, "that I forgive you for taking her. I forgive you for the years we lost. I forgive you for not trusting me to keep you both safe. You did what you thought was right, and you kept our daughter alive. That's what matters." He placed his other hand on the headstone. "Lucy's home now, Kate. She's safe. She's with me. I promise you, I will protect her. I will provide for her. I will love her the way we should have loved her together. You can rest now. Your sacrifice wasn't in vain. She's home. Our sunshine is finally home." Lucy's sobs shook her whole body. She leaned forward, pressing her palm against her mother's name carved in stone. "I understand now, Mama," she whispered. "I understand why you ran. Why you never told me. Why you carried it all alone. You were protecting me. You loved me enough to give up everything. I forgive you too. And I promise, I'll live the life you wanted for me. I'll be safe. I'll be loved. I'll be home." Stephen pulled Lucy into his arms, and they knelt together in the grass, crying for Kate, for the years lost, for the family that had been shattered and was now, impossibly, being pieced back together. When they finally returned to the mansion, Lucy walked through the front entrance. Not the servants' entrance, but the grand marble foyer where she'd played as a child. She climbed the sweeping staircase, her hand on the same banister she'd gripped with small fingers 14 years ago. She walked into Stephen's study and stood before her portrait. The 7-year-old girl smiled out at her, innocent and loved, frozen in a moment before everything changed. Lucy touched the frame gently. "I'm back," she whispered to her younger self. "It took 14 years, but I found my way home." Stephen appeared beside her, placing his hand on her shoulder. "You were never truly lost," he said softly. "You were always my daughter, always loved, always searched for, always waited for." Lucy leaned against her father, looking at the portrait that had hung in the study through 14 years of grief and hope. It was no longer a memorial to loss. It was a bridge between past and present, between the child she'd been and the young woman she'd become. She was Lucy Reynolds, daughter, heir, home at last. And finally, after years of surviving, she could start living.
And that's it for today's video. If you enjoyed it or learned something new, make sure to hit that like button. It really helps support the channel. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next. Drop your thoughts or questions in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.